Please continue with some of the deception that they're involved in that you guys are exposing.
Well, you brought up molten metal as well, and this is one of the critical pieces of evidence that is denied by NIST. In fact, before NIST took over the investigation, FEMA had done their own investigation. And interestingly enough, their conclusion, first of all, is that fire, which is their best hypothesis of how this building came down, has a very low probability of occurrence. What do you do when your best hypothesis has a low probability of occurrence? You look for another hypothesis. In fact, they found some evidence and documented it very well for the explosive controlled demolition with a new type of material, an incendiary called thermite. This stuff there's evidence all throughout the World Trade Center of thermite. In fact, there is several tons of molten metal found by the first responders, found by the World Trade Center structural engineer Wesley Robertson and associates of his, and other structural engineers document the melting of steel.
And how do you get all this molten steel when we're talking about thousands of degrees above what we know is going on? I mean, the people are standing in the wounds in the buildings, waving their arms. It's not melting them. How does it melt these big 4-foot-around girders? Then we have the video of the molten steel, the proper coloration. The studies have been done, pouring out, founting out like a foundry. We have the firefighters on TV saying it was just like a foundry, like inside a volcano, just molten metal everywhere. And then for weeks we have this molten metal.
Yeah. Absolutely, and FEMA documents the melting of the steel, the hot sulfur corrosion attack, turning 3/4-inch girders into Swiss cheese. This is documented by Abu Hassan Astani, the structural engineer who had unlimited access out there. Where does all of this melted steel come from? And even more importantly, what did NIST do with this documentation in Appendix C of the final FEMA report in May of 2002? They eject it. It is not a part of the official record. They cannot afford to acknowledge this molten metal. In fact, their lead structural engineer, John Gross, denies that there's any evidence or witnesses of molten metal. He denies this publicly when there's dozens of witnesses and plenty of photographic evidence, as you cited, flowing out of the South Tower near the jet plane impact.
The local student group, PNAC, a project for a New American Citizen, they got, a few years ago questioned him about that, and he said there is no molten metal. It didn't matter if they had the video there. We're trying to show him, and now there's all this footage of molten metal, but still they're in denial about it.
They're going to have to, at some point, acknowledge that it exists and come up with some excuse. What we've heard so far is, oh, well, the fire was down in the debris, and it was so insulated that it got hotter and hotter and hotter, which is physically impossible.
That's not how it works. Things cool in entropy. All right, we'll be right back with Richard Gage. Long segment coming up on your phone calls on 9/11, 1-800-259-9231. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Where do you see 9/11 truth going in the future? We have April Gallup filing a suit. She was in the Pentagon, one of the heroes, showing with her evidence it's an inside job, and then how they persecuted her when she started asking questions. It seems that 9/11 truth is only growing and growing and growing. Richard Gage.
It's growing by millions every year, as a matter of fact. We had, as you mentioned, the Europeans brought us out. We had national coverage in Madrid, and we were sellout crowds in half of the European cities. They're more awake over there, and the media is less controlled in many of the areas of Europe, not all by any means. We expect to have 1,000 architects and engineers signed on demanding a real investigation by late summer, and we will take the petition to Washington, D.C., and take lots of members of the 9/11 Truth Movement with us, hold a press conference at the National Press Club, and present a petition to Congress. So we hope to also have hundreds of our architects and engineers there with us. So that's a big push for us. There's a large conference for 9/11 happening in Australia also in November, and a very important conference in Denver, American Transparency. You must know about that one, coming up in February. So there's a lot going on, a lot happening. I wanted to make sure. I realize I left some of your listeners hanging relative to this molten metal, because some people say, well, who cares? What does that mean? Well, it turns out that this is not melted steel. It turns out that it's not aluminum from a jet airplane. It's molten iron. It's iron. This stuff is brought up, and iron, while a component of structural steel, this is not that. This is the byproduct of thermite. This is pure iron with elements of aluminum, sulfur, manganese, fluorine, and even 1,3-diphenyl propane, interesting, is found. Eric Schwartz of the EPA says they've never found that before. All of this is the key chemical signature of thermite, a high-tech incendiary, which is used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter.
And not just thermite, but thermate, the specific type. They don't just find the thermate residue, they're finding the thermite residue.
And it's not just the thermite or thermate residue either. It is a very high-tech form of thermate with nano-sized particles found in unignited chips, red on one side, gray on the other, in all of the dust samples.
So we're even finding part of the unignited explosive, the thermate. And then it turns out some of the people at NIST just so happen to be former NASA experts in thermate couplers, explosive bolts, for separating intercontinental ballistic missiles and large booster components in their second and third stages. Just so happens that there's of just a few experts in the world on thermate. They just so happen to be the people over at NIST. That's interesting.
It's very interesting, and you can read more about that on our website on the technical articles. Kevin Ryan has done some incredible work. Our website is AE911truth.org, and people can also purchase the DVD to get more information. We have a 2-hour DVD on all of this evidence. It's all laid out for you.
Absolutely. Tell folks they can get that there at the site.
Yeah, right on the left side of the website, AE911truth.org. The evidence is listed for you on the right side. There's plenty of very important articles. The PowerPoint presentation that I have used in 80 different presentations around the country and in Europe and Canada is there. You can step through like 500 slides, very carefully read all the information.
Other points in your research that you haven't made that we need to go over, and then secondarily, second, I would like you to speak about the explosive growth of your organization.
Oh, you bet. Well, relative to Building 7, let's complete this, because it's not just the fact that we have free fall, which one is only one of the many smoking guns. This building, 47 stories high, begins immediately its descent, and it falls symmetrically and smoothly, nearly straight down and almost into its own footprint. This is a feat that only a handful of companies in the world can even accomplish, and it is in itself proof of controlled demolition, because in order to bring a building straight down, you have to take out, in this case, the 23 core columns within a tenth of a second of each other, synchronistically timed floor by floor. That's the only way you can get it to come down straight. So that is a second smoking gun, if you will. Indeed, also, we have throughout the whole ground zero, all of this dust that blanketed lower Manhattan has these tiny iron-rich microspheres smaller than a human hair, most of them. This could only have come from an aluminothermic event, because they have the chemical ingredients, once again, of ignited thermite. So there's no way that all of this dust, 20 minutes away in the Brooklyn Bridge, up on top of the skyscrapers 2-3 blocks away, and filling all of the apartments, could have these billions of these spheres. Well, how do they get to be spheres? Well, in liquid does this. Its surface tension forms itself into a sphere. So in an explosive event, this molten iron, which is the byproduct of thermite, is dispersed, atomized, and this is how this happens. It's the only way it could happen. We're told, well, the welders down on the site cutting the steel could make spheres. Well, they can't make billions of them and send them 20 minutes away to the Brooklyn Bridge. These explanations make no sense.
And they can't
whatsoever.
magically have the spheres be made up of the exact compounds in explosive thermite.
That's right. And attached to the unignited chips, as found in the dust by Dr. Stephen Jones and documented in peer-reviewed journals like the Open Civil Engineering Journal and others.